I'm sitting out at the September 11th Memorial in Canby, Oregon at their fire department here. It's believed to be the biggest in the state of Oregon today. And I was reading a newspaper article about this memorial and its dedication that is taking place on September 11th, 2011. And they said that they wanted to have it built because they made a promise that they would never forget. They put those words never here, and on the other side, forget, and they built this memorial so that they could live out that promise. I think that most of us will probably never forget. In fact, we almost all remember where we were when we found out about the Twin Towers being hit by those planes. For me, I was laying in bed and my stepmom said, Chad, you got to get up. Something's happening. It looks like New York is under attack. The Twin Towers have been hit by planes. And so I got up and we turned on the news footage. And I hate to admit it now, but at the time, it just didn't seem very real to me. It seemed like something I was so disconnected from, almost movie-like. It wasn't until a few days later that I understood the magnitude of that event. And at that time, I was leading a retirement home Bible study, and there was 3 or 4 people who would attend on average. And that morning I showed up, and the person in charge at the retirement home said, they're not in the normal room, they're outside because there's too many of them. So I went outside and I found that there was about 125 people waiting for me to say something. In that moment I realized that it wasn't just a small event in history, but it was a life-changing event, because those people who had lived through World War II and the bombing of Pearl Harbor knew how much it would change our country. Today, as I look back, I realize that it has changed our country more than we ever could have imagined. On that morning, as I went out there, I realized that what I had prepared wasn't the right thing for the situation, the Bible study that I had put together, and so I decided to speak from my heart. I got up and I quoted my favorite verses from Psalm 94, 18 and 19. And there it says, when I feel my foot slipping, your faithfulness, O Lord, supports me. And when I am filled with cares, your reassurance soothes my soul forever. Seems like when we notice the evil of the world, when we see evil things take place, bad things going on around us, we have 2 choices. We can either be pushed away from God and say, hey, God, why did you do this? Why did you allow for this to happen? Or we can be drawn to God and we can put our hope in Him and we can find joy in Him despite the things that we are facing. I remember back to the weeks that followed the bombing of the World Trade Centers and the Pentagon, and I remember how people returned to God. This morning, we're going to play an interview for you. And my hope is that as you remember through the eyes of somebody who actually witnessed those towers be bombing from his apartment, as you remember that and take in this interview, that you would be drawn back to God. And remember that while evil exists in this world, the only hope that we have in the midst of that evil, the only thing that can get us through when we are facing the difficulties of life, is God Himself. He is the one who will keep our feet from slipping, and He is the one who will bring us joy no matter what the situation is that we face in life. After I taught that message at the retirement home, I realized that the people needed something more. They needed to worship their God. And so, with all the fear that I could possibly have in my life, I got up and I led Amazing Grace. And I say today, there's hardly been a more powerful moment than that moment, because as the people looked at evil, they were reminded about how great God's grace was, and they reacted to it by worshiping Him. And that is my hope for us as we watch this video.
So I work for Nike. I've worked there for about 10 years. Prior to that, I worked for a firm out in New York called Lippincott & Margulies. It's one of the largest brand design firms in the world. Does international work, all Fortune 100 companies. It was on the corner of 49th and Park Avenue, and I lived in Brooklyn Heights, and that's kind of where the 9/11, my 9/11 story starts. I'm the youngest of 3 kids. My parents are still both married, and they live in Kaiser, Oregon. My brother's in the military. My sister's mother of 2 boys. Brother has 4 boys, and I'm newly married this past year. We got married off in Sisters, Oregon, then took off for Europe and did a couple of weeks out there. So that's essentially it. I grew up in Kaiser, was born in Colorado, and that's essentially my story. And so I was asleep at 9 o'clock in the morning, and my apartment was right by the BQE, which is the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, which wraps around Brooklyn and it goes over the Brooklyn Bridge right into downtown where the towers are. So I was literally approximately about a mile away from them, and from my bedroom, I could see the towers. I could see the Statue of Liberty. I could see, Upper Manhattan, and then the East Hudson was right in front of me. And that morning, I was waking up around 9, and I just heard these sirens going by, which isn't abnormal. And so they just kept on going and going, and it just seemed like it was getting excessive. So I decided to wake up, and I open up my windows, and I see one of the towers smoking. And my first inclination was that they were doing some testing and something went wrong, or Hollywood is shooting a movie and something went wrong. But basically, the idea was that terrorism was the farthest thing from my mind. I didn't have any inclination that would ever happen. So as I'm staring out the window, down below me are hundreds of fire trucks and ambulances and police cars parading towards the downtown area. And I'm just kind of taking it all in, and I call my parents and ask them to get on the TV at 6 in the morning, their time, 9 o'clock our time, right? And as I'm sitting there, I see the second plane hit. It just pummels into the building, and I still at that point I had no real emotion. In fact, I didn't really have any emotion that day because I just didn't know what to think about anything. I didn't know what was real, if they were imploding the buildings for some reason. I had no clue, other than the fact that they were smoking. And so the day kind of wears on, and we end up going to the top of this tram station to get a better view. And at that point, one of the buildings fell. The first building fell. And if you ever see the televised video of the towers falling and smoking, you're usually looking from the Empire State Building, which goes straight down Manhattan, and it has the best view of it. And you see the smokestack go up in the air, and it settles right into Brooklyn Heights, and that's where I was. And we were smoked out for about 3 days, and I ended up having tonsils and lung and esophagus issues for years. In fact, so much that about 6 months ago I finally had my tonsils removed, and I kept on having strep throat after that. Something like coal miners get, people that inhale smoke like that. So with that, there was a lot of obviously interesting things that happened. For a while, shard pieces of paper would fall from the sky. Like, you ever look at like a cabin in the middle of winter when it's all snowy out and people are burning a fire on the inside, and the paper lights up and you see little pieces of paper like fall, like puff out of the house. It's very similar, except that they're, those towers are like big smokestacks, and they were just puffing out paper. And so paper was falling, and it was like Morgan Stanley's buying out so-and-so, rat testing's being done on this rat. Basically everyone in the city had their files in a vault within that building, as well as all the other floors that had stuff. So all that was just littering the streets, and it was almost like a snowy Christmas, how much the streets were just covered with that. There's points where I couldn't see 6 feet in front of me. It was so smoky, and our best bet was to go from our apartment down several flights, through 2 buildings, and then over to a place called Sparky's. Sparky's Margulies. It was a bar, a pub owned by this English guy. Not English, Irish guy. And we just knew that he had the largest air conditioner around. And so we were just hoping that would be a good place to go. And it was. And we ended up going in there. And with the rest of the patrons around, we ended up having beers the rest of the first day. And just sharing stories with people. And it was an old Italian neighborhood where, we had mafia members there, but it's a very clean neighborhood in the fact that that's where they lived, and you would never have a crack addict ever even think about stepping foot in that neighborhood because it was just all protected. And I ended up meeting people that day that knew more about me than I had any idea. They knew what time I came home. They knew that I was a safe person to have in the neighborhood. They just knew my habits. They knew where I lived, and they were all part of the Italian mafia that protected that little street. And that was just one of the touching points, is just to get to, it obviously brought everyone together. Shortly after that, there was some pictures I can remember of I've got these photos for you, of like doors that people would put notes on it, and it was like revenge equals self-destruction, and there was a lot of immediate reaction to everything that happened there. I think we pretty much knew after that fourth plane fell and crashed outside of DC. I think we knew what was going on, but it seemed like forever. I mean, 5 minutes back then seemed like 5 hours because everything was going so quickly. But yeah, it took a long time. Obviously, it got emotional afterwards. I think 3 to 4 days after the smoke had finally kind of gone away and we were able to be outside and realize that we were trapped there because the whole city shut down. There was no taxis, no subway, there's no way to get out, no one had cars. The toughest part was I was able to talk to my parents immediately once it happened, but after the buildings fell, there was so much destruction in the city and the phone lines were so overloaded. I didn't get through to them for about 2 weeks. There's no way to contact them. Internet, everything was out. So they had no idea if I was safe. They had no idea where I was. They had, there wasn't much other than me calling them saying, look at the TV. Like I said, my response was pretty numb. I didn't know what to think. I didn't have any personal association that there's actually people in there. I just thought the buildings imploded wrong. And then, of course, after seeing the airplane hit, I thought it was Hollywood had messed something up. But I really didn't think that there was anybody in there. But I do remember being on the top of the train trestle that was right by our house, that basically the subway comes out of the ground in Brooklyn and rides on top of the tracks, upper, 2 stories up. And then it goes down underneath the river and then pops up underneath the towers, actually. Had I been going to work, I probably would have been trapped underneath the towers when this whole thing happened. But I saw, people crying and tears and just absolute devastation. I remember hearing stories from, we were on the 19th and 20th floor of the Bloomberg building. Bloomberg, who is the mayor and everything of New York, and above us was Charlie Rose, and ride the elevator half the time, and Mel Gibson would be in there. But anyway, this guy was on the corner of our building, and he was this little Jewish guy, and just a great sense of humor usually. But he said he just looked up from his desk, saw an airplane flying really low. I'm a New Yorker. Boom, starts working again. Didn't think anything of it. So there's a lot of different reactions on how people treated the situation. I think all in all, after everyone realized what had happened, it's changed everyone. It's changed everyone.